The stone floors of the palace were always cold, even in summer. I'd learned to move quietly across them, my worn shoes making barely a whisper as I carried linens from the washing quarters to the guest chambers. The other servants said I was born to be invisible. Pale hair always tied back severely, eyes downcast, movements efficient and forgettable. They meant it as a compliment. In a place like this, where power radiated from every corner and predators wore crowns, invisibility was survival. I'd been working in the palace for 3 years, ever since my village was absorbed into the kingdom's territory. The integration had been violent for some, but my family had bent like reeds in a storm. We survived by offering what little we had, and I was what they could spare, a daughter with quick hands and a quiet disposition, perfect for service, perfect for disappearing into the background while wolves discussed matters of state and territory over meals I'd prepared but would never taste. The Alpha King's palace smelled of pine and leather, of old stone and burning cedar. It smelled of dominance. Even the air seemed heavier here, pressed down by the weight of so many powerful beings contained in one place. I'd grown accustomed to it, the way you grow accustomed to a constant ache. It became part of the rhythm of my days. Wake before dawn, work until exhaustion, collapse onto my narrow bed in the servants' quarters, and repeat. Today had been particularly draining. The king was hosting a gathering of regional alphas, and the palace buzzed with tension. I'd spent the morning polishing silver until my reflection stared back at me, ghostly and strange. In the afternoon, I'd helped prepare the great hall, hanging banners that represented territories I'd never see, arranging flowers that cost more than my yearly wage. The head housekeeper, Margot, had been especially harsh, her anxiety over the event making her sharp-tongued and quick to criticize. "You call that clean?" she'd snapped when I'd presented a set of crystal glasses. "The king's guests will think we're savages. Do it again." I'd done it again, and again, until my hands were raw and my eyes burned with suppressed frustration. But I didn't complain. Complaints were for people who had choices, and I'd learned long ago that my survival depended on being exactly what was needed. Nothing more, nothing less. By the time evening fell and I was finally dismissed, my entire body ached with the particular exhaustion that comes from being perpetually alert. The gathering had gone well, from what I could tell through snippets of conversation overheard while serving wine. The visiting alphas had been impressed by the king's hospitality, by the show of strength and stability his court represented. I'd caught glimpses of him throughout the evening. Dante, the Alpha King. He was impossible not to notice, even when you were trying very hard to remain unnoticed yourself. Tall and broad-shouldered, with dark hair that caught the firelight, and eyes that seemed to see through every pretense. When he spoke, rooms fell silent. When he moved, people shifted unconsciously to give him space. He carried authority like a second skin, so natural it seemed inevitable. I'd served his table personally, pouring wine with steady hands, while alphas discussed border disputes and trade agreements. He hadn't looked at me once, not once, and I'd been grateful for it, even as some small, traitorous part of me wondered what it would feel like to be seen by someone like that. To be perceived as more than a function, more than a pair of hands that carried things and cleaned things and then disappeared. The servants' exit led through a side courtyard and down a narrow street that connected the palace grounds to the market district. It was the route we all took, those of us who lived in the city, rather than the palace itself. The night air was cool against my flushed skin as I stepped outside, and I breathed deeply, trying to release the tension that had built up over the long day. The street was dimly lit, only a few oil lamps casting pools of amber light across the cobblestones. Most shops were closed, their windows dark, but I could hear distant sounds of taverns still serving late patrons. I kept my head down, and my pace steady. The city was safer than it used to be under the king's rule, but that didn't mean a young woman should linger alone after dark. I was halfway down the street when I heard it, a soft, pained sound that made me freeze mid-step. It came from an alcove between two buildings, barely wide enough to be called an alley. For a moment, I considered walking on. It wasn't my business. I had enough to worry about without adding someone else's troubles to my burden. But the sound came again, weaker this time, and my feet betrayed me. They carried me toward the darkness of that narrow space, toward whatever suffering was hidden there. He was young, maybe 15 or 16, huddled against the stone wall with his arms wrapped around his middle. Even in the dim light, I could see he was in bad shape, thin to the point of starvation, clothes that were little more than rags and bruises darkening his pale skin. His hair was matted, his face gaunt, but it was his eyes that stopped me cold. They held the kind of emptiness that comes from prolonged suffering, from having begged for help so many times that you no longer expect it to come. "Please," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "Please, I just need—" He didn't finish. His body convulsed slightly, and I realized with a jolt that he was shivering despite the mild evening. Fever, probably, and from the way he held himself. Injured, too. Something in his abdomen, maybe. Or his ribs. I should have called for the city guard. That would have been the proper thing to do, the safe thing. Let them handle it. Let someone else decide what to do with a sick, homeless boy in an alley. But I'd seen how the guards handled such cases. They cleared the streets of undesirables, with efficiency and no particular gentleness. This boy would be lucky to end up in a workhouse. More likely, he'd just be driven out of the city to die somewhere less visible. The decision made itself before I could think it through. I moved closer, crouching down so I wouldn't loom over him. Up close, I could see he was even younger than I'd thought. A child, really. A child who was dying in an alley while the palace glittered with wealth and power just streets away. "Can you stand?" I asked quietly. He stared at me like I was an apparition, something his fevered mind had conjured. Then, slowly, he shook his head. I glanced back toward the street, calculating. I wasn't strong enough to carry him, but maybe... If I help... Can you lean on me? We don't have far to go. Why? The question came out raw, confused. Why would you... Because you need help, I said simply. And I can give it. It took several attempts to get him upright. He was lighter than he should have been, all bone and sinew, but still heavier than my exhausted body wanted to bear. I pulled his arm over my shoulders and wrapped my own arm around his waist, trying to provide support without aggravating whatever injury he was protecting. "There's a healing house 2 streets over," I told him, starting the slow shuffle back toward the main road. "They'll take you in. They have to." He made a sound that might have been a laugh or a sob. "They'll take one look at me and they'll help," I insisted, with more confidence than I felt. They took an oath. We emerged from the alley into the lamplight, and I immediately felt exposed. We must have looked absurd, a palace maid in her simple uniform supporting a boy who looked like he'd crawled out of a grave. Anyone who saw us would have questions. Questions I didn't have good answers for, but the street was mostly empty, just a few late stragglers heading home, too wrapped up in their own concerns to pay us much attention. I focused on moving forward, one step at a time, keeping the boy steady as he leaned heavily against me. That's when I heard it. The sound of multiple footsteps, coordinated and purposeful. My stomach dropped. I didn't need to look to know what was coming. The king's personal guard, likely escorting him back to the palace after some business in the city. Of all the terrible timing, I tried to move faster, to get us out of sight before they reached our section of street, but the boy stumbled, his legs giving out, and suddenly all his weight was on me. I staggered, going down on one knee, fighting to keep us both from collapsing entirely onto the cobblestones. "I'm sorry," the boy gasped. "I'm sorry, I can't—" "It's okay," I managed, though my arms were shaking with effort. "Just hold on, we're almost—" The footsteps stopped. I could feel their presence, multiple wolves, their attention focused on us like a physical weight. My heart hammered against my ribs. Slowly, dreading what I'd see, I looked up. The Alpha King stood 10 feet away, surrounded by 4 of his personal guard. In the lamplight, his expression was unreadable, but his dark eyes were fixed on us with an intensity that made my breath catch. He looked different out here, away from the formal trappings of the palace. More dangerous, somehow, more real. For a long moment, no one moved. I knelt there on the cold street, supporting a dying boy, while the most powerful man in the kingdom stared at us. I waited for the order to move along, or worse, for questions about what a palace servant was doing consorting with street trash. But then something changed in his expression. His eyes moved from me to the boy, and what I saw there wasn't disgust or annoyance. It was something I couldn't quite identify, something that looked almost like the king moved, not away, but toward us. He crossed the distance in 3 long strides, and before I could process what was happening, he was there, right there, kneeling beside us on the filthy cobblestones in his fine clothes. His voice, when he spoke, was nothing like I'd heard before, quiet, almost gentle. How long has he been like this? I couldn't find my voice. The Alpha King was kneeling beside me on a dirty street, asking me questions like this was somehow normal, like he talked to lowly servants about dying boys in alleys every day. His presence this close was overwhelming. I could smell cedar and something wild, feel the heat radiating from him despite the cool night air. I just found him, I finally managed, my voice coming out smaller than I intended. Maybe 10 minutes ago, he was in the alley. I was taking him to the healing house. The king's hand reached out, and I tensed, but he wasn't touching me. His fingers went to the boy's neck, checking for a pulse with surprising gentleness. The boy whimpered, trying to pull away, but he didn't have the strength. "Easy," the king murmured. "No one's going to hurt you." One of the guards stepped forward. "Your Majesty, we should get a healer," the king interrupted, not looking away from the boy. "Now, have them meet us at the palace." The guard hesitated for only a fraction of a second, before bowing and disappearing into the night at inhuman speed. The remaining 3 guards shifted uncomfortably, clearly unsure how to handle their king kneeling in the street like a common citizen. "He needs immediate care," the king said, and it took me a moment to realize he was talking to me. "The healing house is too far. He won't make it." The boy's breathing had become more labored in just the few minutes we'd been stopped. I could feel him getting heavier against me, his body starting to shut down. The king was right. We'd never make it 2 more streets. Without warning, the king moved. He slipped his arms under the boy with practiced ease, lifting him as if he weighed nothing. The boy made a sound of protest, but it died quickly. He was barely conscious now, his head lolling against the king's chest. "You did the right thing," the king said, and it took me a moment to realize he was talking to me again. His dark eyes met mine, and for the first time since I'd started working at the palace, the Alpha King actually saw me. Really saw me. Stopping to help him, many wouldn't have. I didn't know what to say to that. My mouth opened, closed. I probably looked like a fish drowning in air. "Come," he said, already turning back toward the palace. "You'll need to tell the healer what you know." It wasn't a request. I scrambled to my feet, my knees protesting after kneeling on the cold stone. The remaining guards fell into formation around us, around all 3 of us, and suddenly, I was walking through the city streets in the Alpha King's personal escort, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might crack my ribs. The palace gates opened before we reached them. Guards already alerted to our approach. Staff members appeared in doorways, their faces shocked as they saw what their king carried. Whispers started immediately, spreading like wildfire through the corridors. The Alpha King, carrying a street boy in his own arms. The king, with a common maid walking beside him. It would be the talk of the palace by morning. We didn't go to the main halls. Instead, the king took us through a side entrance I'd never used, up a narrow staircase to the private wings where only family and high-ranking pack members were allowed. My presence here felt like a violation, like I was seeing something I shouldn't. But the king's stride never faltered. He shouldered open a door into a room I recognized as one of the guest suites. Not the grandest, but still far nicer than anywhere this boy had probably ever been. The king laid him carefully on the bed, and the boy's eyes fluttered open briefly, confusion and fear mixing in their depths. "You're safe," the king told him, with that same unexpected gentleness. "Sleep now." Whether it was the alpha command in his voice or simple exhaustion, the boy's eyes closed. His breathing was still shallow, still wrong, but at least he was on a soft bed instead of dying in an alley. The door burst open and a woman rushed in, the palace healer Iris, her gray hair wild like she'd been pulled from sleep. She took one look at the scene and immediately moved to the bed, her hands already glowing with the soft light that marked her gift. "Out," she ordered, not bothering with titles or deference. Healers had that privilege. Their work was too important for politics. "Everyone out. I need space and quiet." The king nodded and moved toward the door. I started to follow, but Iris grabbed my wrist. "Not you. You found him. I'll need details." She was already pulling back the boy's ragged shirt, revealing a mess of bruises and what looked like a poorly healing wound along his ribs. Her face tightened. "How long has he been on the streets?" "I don't know," I said. "I just found him tonight. He was in an alley off Market Street, barely conscious. Fever, I think, and he was holding his middle like something hurt there." Iris's hands moved over the boy's body, her gift seeking out injuries and illnesses with practiced efficiency. "Infection," she muttered. "Bad one. Broken rib that healed wrong. Malnutrition. Exposure." She looked up at me sharply. "Another few hours and he'd have been dead. You saved his life." The words felt too big, too significant. I'd just done what anyone should do. Except, as the king had said, most people wouldn't have. Most people would have walked past, told themselves it wasn't their problem, that getting involved would only bring trouble. "Will he be all right?" I asked. "If I can get the infection down and get some food into him." Iris was already preparing herbs, mixing them with practiced speed. "It'll be touch and go tonight. You can leave. I'll send word if there's any change." I glanced at the boy's pale face, his chest rising and falling too fast. Something in me resisted leaving, even though I was exhausted and confused, and had no reason to stay. He'd been alone in that alley, probably alone for a long time before that. It seemed wrong to leave him alone now. "I'd like to stay," I said quietly, "if that's allowed." Iris glanced at me, something like approval in her eyes. "Suit yourself. But don't get in my way." I backed into a corner, making myself small and invisible again, my natural state. Iris worked with focused intensity, her hands glowing as she directed healing energy into the boy's worst injuries. I watched the infection slowly recede under her care, watched color start to return to his face, watched his breathing gradually ease into something more natural. Time lost meaning. It could have been an hour or 3 when the door opened again and the king returned. He'd changed from his formal attire into simpler clothes, though they still marked him as someone of importance. His hair was damp, like he'd washed. His eyes went immediately to the bed. "He's stable," Iris reported without looking up. "The infection nearly killed him, but I've got it controlled. He'll need careful monitoring for the next few days, and it'll be weeks before he's fully recovered. But he'll live." "Good." The king moved closer to the bed, looking down at the boy with an expression I couldn't read. "Do we know anything about him? Family? How he ended up like this?" "He hasn't woken properly yet to tell us," Iris said. "But from the scars and the way some of his injuries healed, I'd say he's been on his own for a while. Months, maybe longer." The king's jaw tightened. "In my city. Under my rule." There was something dangerous in his voice, a barely contained rage that made the air feel heavier. But it wasn't directed at the boy or at me. It was turned inward, like he was angry at himself for not knowing, for not seeing. "You can't save everyone, Your Majesty," Iris said gently. "You can only save the ones you find." "Then we need to find more." He turned those dark eyes on me, and I fought the urge to look away. "You. What's your name?" "Elara, Your Majesty." The lie came automatically. I'd been using my middle name since coming to the palace, a small attempt to keep some part of myself separate from this life. But my real name was Vera. I'd almost forgotten what it felt like to be her. "Elara," he repeated, like he was committing it to memory. "You work in the palace?" "Yes, Your Majesty. In housekeeping." "How long have you worked here?" 3 years, Your Majesty." He studied me for a long moment, and I felt stripped bare under that gaze, like he was seeing past the servant's uniform and the downcast eyes to something underneath. 3 years, and I've never noticed you." It wasn't a question, but I answered anyway. That's intentional, Your Majesty. We're trained to be unobtrusive, invisible, he said, and there was something sharp in the word. You're trained to be invisible so people like me can pretend people like you don't exist, he shook his head. That ends now. I had no idea what that meant, but before I could ask, the boy on the bed stirred. His eyes opened slowly, unfocused at first, then widening as he took in his surroundings. He tried to sit up, panic flooding his features. Easy, Iris said firmly, pressing him back down. You're safe. You're in the palace, being cared for. Palace? The boy's voice was rough, confused. His eyes darted around the room, landing on me. Recognition flickered. You helped me. She did more than help, the king said, drawing the boy's attention. She saved your life. The boy's eyes went wide as he registered who was speaking. He tried to scramble back, to make himself smaller, the instinct of someone who'd learned to fear authority. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to. I'll leave. I'll go right now. You're not going anywhere, the king said, but his voice had that gentleness again. You're injured, and you'll stay here until you're healed. That's not a request. The boy stared at him, clearly trying to process this. But I'm nobody. I'm just... You're someone who needed help, the king interrupted. And in my kingdom, that's enough. The boy's name was Owen, we learned over the next few days. He was 17, though he looked years younger from malnutrition and hardship. His parents had died in a fire 2 years ago, and with no other family, he'd ended up on the streets. He'd survived by doing odd jobs, sleeping in alleys, and staying invisible. Just like me, I realized. We'd both learned that survival meant becoming something people could overlook. But the king wouldn't let him be overlooked anymore. He'd given orders that Owen was to be treated as a guest of the palace, not a charity case. The boy had his own room, proper clothes, and 3 meals a day. Iris monitored his recovery with the same care she'd give to royalty. And I found myself visiting him daily, drawn by something I couldn't quite name. Maybe it was because I'd been the one to find him. Maybe it was because his story could have so easily been mine. A few different choices, a few different circumstances, and I could have been the one dying in that alley. Or maybe it was simpler than that. Maybe I'd just been lonely for so long that I'd forgotten what it felt like to connect with someone who understood what it meant to be powerless. You don't have to keep coming, Owen said on the 4th day, though his tone suggested he hoped I would anyway. He was sitting up in bed, color finally returning to his face, though he was still painfully thin. I know you must be busy. I want to, I said honestly, settling into the chair beside his bed. I'd brought him soup from the kitchens, a rich bone broth that would help build his strength. Besides, you're the most interesting thing that's happened to me in 3 years. He laughed, a sound that was still rusty from disuse. Interesting. That's one way to put it. He accepted the soup gratefully, his hands steadier than they'd been yesterday. Everyone here keeps looking at me like they don't know what to make of me. I heard some of the servants whispering. They think I'm the king's illegitimate son or something. I nearly choked. They what? I know, it's ridiculous, Owen shook his head. But they can't figure out why else he'd care. Why else he'd order everyone to treat me well. He paused, soup spoon halfway to his mouth. Why do you think he did it? Helped me, I mean. He's the Alpha King. He could have just walked past. I'd been asking myself the same question. I'd seen the king from a distance for 3 years, had served at his table dozens of times, and I'd built an image of him in my mind. Powerful, remote, focused on matters of state and territory. The man who'd knelt on a dirty street to help a dying boy didn't fit that image. I think, I said slowly, that maybe we don't see people clearly when we're too busy being afraid of them. Owen considered this. Are you afraid of him? I was, I admitted. Maybe I still am, a little, but fear and respect aren't the same thing, are they? Before Owen could respond, the door opened. We both straightened instinctively, servants' reflexes, the automatic response to potential authority. But it was just Iris, carrying her medical bag, and wearing her perpetually harried expression. How's our patient today? She asked. Already moving to examine Owen, she checked his pulse, looked at his eyes, pressed gently on his ribs where the worst of the injuries had been. Better, Much better. You'll be ready to start moving around soon, building your strength back up. What happens then? Owen asked quietly. After I'm healed, do I go back? The question hung in the air, heavy with implications. Back to the streets, to alleys and hunger and slow death. Back to being invisible and disposable. That's not my decision, Iris said carefully, but I suspect His Majesty has plans. As if summoned by the mention, there was a knock on the door. My stomach flipped. I'd been lucky enough to avoid the king since that first night, had slipped back into my usual routines of housekeeping and invisibility. But I'd known it couldn't last. Enter, Owen called, his voice uncertain. The king stepped into the room, and the space immediately felt smaller. He was dressed for court today, formal attire that emphasized his authority, but his expression was softer than I'd seen it in official settings. His eyes went to Owen first, assessing, then to Iris. How is he? Recovering well, Your Majesty, Iris reported. Another week of rest and proper food, and he'll be ready for light activity. Good. The king moved closer to the bed, his presence commanding without being threatening. Owen, I've been making some inquiries about your situation, about what options you have moving forward. Owen's hands tightened on the blanket. Your Majesty, I'm grateful for everything you've done, but I don't expect— I'm not asking what you expect, the king interrupted gently. I'm telling you what I'm offering. You're 17, old enough to work, but you'll need training first. I'm prepared to sponsor your education in whatever trade interests you. Carpentry, smithing, scholarly pursuits, whatever you choose. You'll live here in the palace until you're ready to support yourself, and then I'll help you establish yourself in the city. Owen stared at him, mouth open, clearly unable to process this. But why? Why would you do all this for someone like me? The king was quiet for a moment, and something passed across his face, something old and painful. Because no one did it for me when I needed it, he said finally. Because power means nothing if you don't use it to help those who have none. His eyes shifted to me, and I felt pinned by that gaze. Both of you understand what it means to be overlooked, to be treated as less than human because you lack status or wealth. That shouldn't be acceptable. Not in my kingdom. I found my voice, though it came out shakier than I intended. Most people in power don't see it that way, Your Majesty. And most people in power are failing their people. He said it simply, like it was obvious. I called a council meeting this morning. I'm implementing new policies, shelters for the homeless, work programs for those who want them, healers who will treat anyone regardless of their ability to pay. Owen won't be the last person who needs help. But he'll be remembered as the first, the one who made me see what I'd been missing. Owen's eyes were wet. I don't know what to say. You don't have to say anything. Just get well, get strong, and when you're ready, decide what you want to do with the second chance you've been given. The king turned toward the door, then paused. Ilara, walk with me. My heart stopped. It wasn't a request. Kings didn't make requests of servants. I stood quickly, smoothing my skirt with nervous hands. Owen gave me an encouraging look, but I could see he was as confused as I was. I followed the king out into the corridor, my mind racing. Had I done something wrong, overstepped by visiting Owen so often? Spread gossip about the king's actions? He didn't speak until we'd walked far enough that no one could overhear. We were in one of the outdoor corridors that overlooked the training grounds, where pack warriors were practicing combat forms. The afternoon sun was warm, and I could hear the clash of practice weapons, the shouts of instruction. You've been visiting Owen every day, the king said. It wasn't a question. Yes, Your Majesty, I hope that was— It's good, he interrupted. He needs friends, not just charity. People who see him as a person, not a project. He leaned against the stone railing, looking out over the training grounds. You're wondering why I asked you to walk with me? Yes, Your Majesty. Because I've been making inquiries about you too. He glanced at me, and I felt my stomach drop. Your name isn't Ilara, it's Vera. You're from the northern villages, absorbed into the kingdom 3 years ago. Your family offered you for palace service as part of their integration terms. I couldn't breathe. He'd investigated me, dug into my past, my real identity. I meant no deception, Your Majesty. Ilara is my middle name. You wanted something that was yours, he finished. I understand that. But tell me, Vera, are you here because you want to be? Or because you had no choice? The question was so unexpected, so direct, that I answered honestly before I could stop myself. I don't know. Both, maybe. My family needed the income, and I wanted to be useful, to matter somehow, even if it was just in small ways. You matter, he said, and the certainty in his voice made my throat tight. What you did for Owen, stopping, helping when no one else would, that mattered more than any grand political gesture I could make. You saw someone suffering, and you acted. That takes courage. It wasn't courage, I protested. It was just the right thing to do. That's what courage is, he said. Doing the right thing even when it's easier not to. Even when it might bring you trouble. He straightened, turning to face me fully. I'm creating a new position, someone to oversee the implementation of the new social programs, the shelters, the work programs, the healers. Someone who understands what it's like to be powerless, who won't let bureaucracy get in the way of actually helping people. I want you to do it. I stared at him, certain I'd misheard. Your Majesty, I'm just a maid. I have no education, no training in... You have empathy, he interrupted. You have the ability to see people who've become invisible to everyone else. And you have the courage to act on that sight. That's more valuable than any amount of formal training. He paused. This isn't an order. You can say no. You can continue in housekeeping if that's what you prefer. But I think you'd be wasted there. I think you could change lives. My mind was spinning. A new position. Real authority. The chance to help people like Owen. Like my younger self. But also exposure. Visibility. The weight of responsibility. I'd have no idea how to start, I whispered. Neither do I, he admitted. We'd figure it out together. You, me, the council members who support this initiative. It won't be easy. There will be resistance from those who think resources should go elsewhere, but I believe it's necessary, and I believe you're the right person to lead it. I looked down at my hands, rough from work, stained from scrubbing. Servant's hands. Could these hands really do what he was suggesting? Can I think about it? I asked. Of course. Take whatever time you need. He straightened. But Vera, and I'll call you that from now on if you'll allow it, don't decide based on fear. Don't let the fact that you're afraid of failing stop you from trying. I spent 3 days wrestling with the decision. 3 days of continuing my usual duties while my mind churned with possibilities and fears. I scrubbed floors and wondered if I could really sit in council meetings. I served meals and imagined trying to convince wealthy alphas to fund programs for the poor. I made beds and thought about Owen, about all the other Owens out there who might never get a second chance. On the 4th day, I found Owen in the library. The king had given him permission to explore the palace, and he'd gravitated toward books like a plant toward sunlight. He was curled in a chair by the window, absorbed in a thick volume about engineering, looking healthier than I'd ever seen him. He'd gained weight. The bruises had faded. He looked like what he was, a young man with his whole life ahead of him. He offered you something, didn't he? Owen said without looking up from his book. The king. That day he asked you to walk with him. I settled into the chair across from him. How did you know? Because he looked at you the same way he looked at me. Like he saw potential where everyone else saw invisibility. Owen closed the book, giving me his full attention. Are you going to take it? I don't know, I admitted. It terrifies me. Good things usually do. He smiled. I was terrified when I woke up in that bed and realized I wasn't dead. Terrified that it was temporary, that I'd wake up back in that alley and this would all have been a fever dream. But it was real. The king was real. The second chance was real. He leaned forward. You gave me that, not just by helping me that night, but by visiting every day after, by treating me like I mattered. Don't you think other people deserve that same chance? That's a lot of pressure. Yeah, it is, Owen agreed. But I've been watching you. You handle pressure better than you think. You just do it quietly so no one notices. I laughed despite myself. That's the nicest way anyone's ever called me a coward. You're not a coward. Cowards don't stop in dark alleys to help dying strangers. Cowards don't keep showing up day after day to sit with someone who has nothing to offer them in return. His expression grew serious. You're just used to being invisible. But maybe it's time to be seen. His words stayed with me as I left the library. They echoed through my mind as I walked through the palace corridors, seeing them with new eyes. How many servants moved through these halls invisible, their lives and struggles unknown to the people they served? How many people in the city beyond these walls were dying slowly, while the wealthy and powerful remained blissfully unaware? The king had said I could change lives. But more than that, I could change the system that made people like Owen and me invisible in the first place. I found the king in his study that evening, reviewing documents by lamplight. He looked tired, the weight of leadership evident in the set of his shoulders. When I knocked, he glanced up, and something shifted in his expression. Surprise, then something warmer. "Vera, come in." I stepped inside, closing the door behind me. The study was lined with books and maps, a desk covered in papers and correspondence. It smelled of ink and leather, and that cedar scent that seemed to follow him. "I've made my decision," I said, before I could lose my nerve. "About your offer." He set down his pen, giving me his full attention. "And? I'll do it. I'll take the position." The words came out steadier than I felt. "But I have conditions." His eyebrows rose. "Conditions?" "Yes." I took a breath. "I want Owen involved. He's brilliant. You should see him with those engineering books, and he understands what it's like to need help better than any trained administrator ever could. When he's ready, I want him to work with me." "Agreed." "What else?" "I want regular access to you, not through intermediaries or formal appointments. If I'm going to do this right, I need to be able to tell you when policies aren't working, when bureaucrats are blocking progress, when money's being wasted. And you need to actually listen." Something like respect flickered in his eyes. "Also agreed. Anything else?" "Yes." This was the hardest part. "I want you to stop calling me just by name. If I'm going to have authority, if I'm going to convince people to take me seriously, I need a title. Director of Social Programs, or Coordinator of Public Welfare, or something. Something that says I speak with your backing." He was quiet for a moment, studying me. Then he smiled. Really smiled. Not the polite expressions he wore in court, but something genuine and warm. "Director of Community Integration. How's that? Perfect." Then it settled. He stood, moving around the desk to stand before me. Up close, I could see the fine lines around his eyes, the silver threading through his dark hair at the temples. He was older than I'd realized, probably in his mid-30s, and there was something in his gaze that spoke of experiences that had shaped him in ways I couldn't imagine. "I'm glad you said yes. I'm terrified I'll fail." "You will sometimes," he said bluntly. "We both will. But that's not a reason not to try." He paused. "Can I tell you something? About why I helped Owen that night?" I nodded, not trusting my voice. "I was him once. Not exactly. My circumstances were different, but I know what it's like to be powerless, to be at the mercy of people who don't see you as fully human." His jaw tightened. "When I became Alpha King, I swore I'd be different, that I'd use my power to protect rather than exploit. But somewhere along the way, I got caught up in the politics, the territory disputes, the endless administrative details. I stopped seeing individuals and started seeing statistics. Until that night," I said quietly, "until I saw you, kneeling on a street, supporting someone everyone else had decided wasn't worth noticing. It reminded me why I wanted this position in the first place, not for power's sake, but for the chance to make things better." He held my gaze. "So thank you. For helping Owen, and for agreeing to help me remember what actually matters." The moment stretched between us, charged with something I couldn't name. Then he stepped back, the professional distance returning. "We'll make the announcement tomorrow at the council meeting. I expect resistance. Some of the older alphas think charity breeds weakness. Are you prepared for that?" "No," I admitted, "but I'll do it anyway." That smile again. That's the spirit. The council meeting was every bit as difficult as I'd anticipated. I stood beside the king in a formal dress hastily procured from somewhere in the palace stores, facing a room full of powerful alphas and advisors who looked at me with expressions ranging from confusion to outright hostility. "A maid," one of the older alphas said flatly. "You're putting a maid in charge of kingdom resources." "I'm putting someone with actual understanding of poverty in charge of poverty relief," the king corrected. "Someone who won't let the programs become empty gestures designed to make us feel better about ourselves." "She has no experience," another council member objected. "No education in administration or resource management. She has empathy and courage," the king replied. "Which is more than I can say for some people in this room who've let our citizens starve in alleys while debating the finer points of trade agreements." The room fell silent. I could feel the tension, the resentment directed at both the king for this decision and at me for daring to accept it. But I thought of Owen, recovering in the palace. I thought of the boy I'd found dying in an alley, and all the others I'd walked past before him, too afraid or too tired to stop. "Your Majesty," I said quietly, and every eye turned to me. My voice wanted to shake, but I forced it steady. "Members of the council, I understand your concerns. I'm not asking you to take me on faith. I'm asking for 3 months to prove this can work. If at the end of that time the programs are failing, I'll step down. But give me the chance to show you that helping our most vulnerable citizens isn't weakness. It's the foundation of a strong kingdom." There was a long silence. Then one of the younger alphas, a woman named Simone who governed the Eastern Territories, spoke up. "I'll support this. We've had problems with displaced people in my region. If Director Vera's programs can help, I'm willing to provide funding." "As will I," another voice added. Then another. "Not everyone, but enough. Enough to start." The king caught my eye across the room, and I saw approval there. Pride, even. The next weeks were a blur of activity. I worked from dawn until well past dark, setting up the infrastructure for the new programs. Owen, true to his word, threw himself into helping once Iris cleared him for full activity. Together, we identified buildings that could be converted into shelters, recruited healers willing to provide care regardless of payment, and established work programs that would give people skills and dignity, along with employment. It was exhausting. It was frustrating. Half the bureaucrats I dealt with seemed determined to slow everything down with regulations and procedures. Some of the wealthier citizens complained about their tax money going to layabouts and criminals. There were days I wanted to quit, to retreat back into invisibility where expectations were lower and failure less public. But then I'd visit one of the new shelters and see families with roofs over their heads for the first time in months. Or Owen would show me the engineering apprenticeship he'd secured, his face bright with possibility. Or someone would stop me in the market to thank me for giving their son a job, their daughter medical care, their family hope. And I'd remember why I was doing this. Not for recognition or status, but because I'd seen what it looked like when people fell through the cracks. And now I had the power to weave a net to catch them. 3 months after the council meeting, I submitted my first formal report. The numbers were modest but promising. 200 people housed, 500 provided medical care, 300 placed in work programs. But the real success was harder to quantify. It was in the faces of people who'd been invisible suddenly being seen. In the shift in how the city viewed its most vulnerable residents, not as problems to be cleared away, but as people deserving of help. The king read my report in his study while I waited, nervous despite everything we'd accomplished. When he looked up, his expression was unreadable. "Well?" I asked finally. "You've exceeded every expectation," he said. "The council voted this morning. The programs are permanent, with increased funding for expansion." He paused. "You've changed this kingdom, Vera. In just 3 months, you've changed how we see ourselves, how we treat our people." Relief and pride warred in my chest. "We've changed it. You, me, Owen, everyone who believed this could work." "No," he said firmly. "You led this. You fought for it when others would have given up. Take credit for what you've accomplished. The seasons changed, and so did I. 6 months into my role as Director of Community Integration, I barely recognized the woman I'd been. The invisible maid who'd kept her eyes down and her voice quiet. I still moved through the palace, but now people stepped aside for me, acknowledged me, sought my counsel on matters that affected the kingdom's most vulnerable. Owen had grown too, both literally and figuratively. At 18 now, he'd shot up several inches and filled out with proper nutrition and training. He'd formally joined my department as an assistant coordinator, bringing his natural intelligence and hard-won understanding of poverty to every decision we made. His engineering studies continued in the evenings, and he'd already designed improvements to 2 of the shelters that made them more efficient and comfortable. "You look tired," he said one afternoon, as we reviewed applications for a new healer training program. We were in my office, a real office with a desk and windows overlooking the gardens, and the afternoon sun slanted across stacks of paperwork. "I'm always tired," I said, but I smiled as I said it. Good tired, though. The kind that comes from actually accomplishing something. Still. Owen set down his pen. "When's the last time you did something just for yourself? Not for the programs, not for the people we're helping, just for you?" I opened my mouth to answer and realized I couldn't. Every waking moment was devoted to work, to the next problem, the next person who needed help. I'd exchanged invisibility for hypervisibility, but I'd still somehow forgotten to actually live. "That's what I thought," Owen said. "Vera, you can't save everyone if you burn yourself out. Trust me, I know about self-destruction." Before I could respond, there was a knock at my door. "Come in," I called. The king entered, and even after months of regular meetings, my heart still did that little skip. He'd changed too over these months, seemed lighter somehow, like the burden of leadership sat easier on his shoulders. Or maybe I just saw him differently now. Saw past the title to the man who'd knelt on a dirty street to help a dying boy. "Am I interrupting?" he asked. "Never, Your Majesty," I said, already starting to stand. "Dante," he corrected, as he'd been doing for weeks now. "We've worked together long enough. Use my name, at least in private." It still felt strange, too familiar, but I was trying. "Dante, then. What can I do for you?" "Actually, I'm here to do something for you." Both of you glanced at Owen. "There's a gathering tonight. Nothing formal, just pack members and friends. Music, food, conversation. I'd like you both to attend, as my personal guests, not as staff or advisors." Owen's eyes widened. "A pack gathering? But we're not. You're under my protection, which makes you pack in every way that matters," Dante interrupted. "Besides, Vera has been working herself to exhaustion for months. She needs an evening off, and I'm making it a royal command." I wanted to protest that I had too much work, but Owen was already nodding enthusiastically. "We'll be there, Your Dante. Thank you." After Dante left, I turned to Owen. "You know I can't go to a pack gathering. I wouldn't fit in. I don't know the customs. You're making excuses," Owen said bluntly. "You're terrified of being seen as something other than the director, of letting people see Vera instead of just your title." He softened. "But you taught me that being vulnerable isn't weakness, that asking for help is courage. Maybe it's time you took your own advice." That evening, I stood before my wardrobe in a panic. I had work clothes and servants' uniforms, but nothing appropriate for a social gathering with the pack elite. A knock on my door revealed a young woman carrying a dress, deep green silk that shimmered in the lamplight. "From His Majesty," she explained. "He thought you might need something suitable for tonight." The dress fit perfectly, flowing over curves I'd forgotten I had. I left my pale hair down instead of in its usual severe bun, and when I looked in the mirror, I barely recognized myself. I looked pretty. Not invisible, not severe, just a young woman going to a party. The gathering was held in one of the palace's private halls, smaller than the formal staterooms, but still impressive. Warm light spilled from windows, and I could hear music and laughter from inside. My steps slowed as I approached, doubt creeping in. "There you are," Owen said, appearing at my elbow. He'd cleaned up nicely too, wearing new clothes that actually fit him, his hair combed back. "Ready?" "Not remotely." "Good, let's go anyway." The hall was full of people, pack members mostly, but also advisors, friends, people who moved in Dante's inner circle. The atmosphere was relaxed, nothing like the formal court functions I'd attended in my role as director. People laughed freely, drinks flowed, and a small group of musicians played in one corner. Dante spotted us immediately, as if he'd been watching for our arrival. He crossed the room with that unconscious grace he had, and several people glanced our way with open curiosity. "You came," he said, and the warmth in his voice made my stomach flip. "I wasn't sure you would." "Owen didn't give me much choice," I said. "Good man." Dante clapped Owen on the shoulder. "Go, enjoy yourself. The food's excellent. And I believe there are several young people your age by the windows who've been asking about the brilliant engineer working in the palace." Owen flushed with pleasure and headed off, leaving me alone with Dante. The music shifted to something slower, more melodic, and couples were beginning to dance. "Walk with me?" Dante offered his arm. I took it, hyper-aware of the contact, of the eyes following us as we moved toward the gardens. The night air was cool and sweet, scented with night-blooming flowers. Lanterns hung from trees, casting soft light across stone paths. "You've been avoiding me," Dante said once we were away from the crowd. "I've been busy," I countered. "We both have." "True, but that's not why." He stopped, turning to face me. "You're afraid of what?" "Of this." He gestured between us, "of what's been building between us for months now." "Don't deny it, Vera. I see how you look at me when you think I'm not watching. The way your breath catches when I enter a room. The way you find excuses to touch my hand when we're reviewing documents together." My face burned. I'm sorry. I never meant to be inappropriate." "Don't apologize." His hand came up to cup my cheek, thumb brushing my skin with devastating gentleness. "I look at you the same way. Have been since that night in the street when you showed me what real courage looks like." "I'm nobody," I whispered. "I'm just a girl from a village who got lucky. You're the Alpha King. Can't we? He stepped closer, and I could smell cedar and something wild. "You're the director of community integration. You've changed this kingdom more in 6 months than most people do in a lifetime. You've earned the respect of the council, the loyalty of everyone who works with you, and the love of the people you've helped. You're extraordinary, Vera. The only person who doesn't see that is you." "People will talk," I said weakly. "They'll say I slept my way into my position, that everything we've built is just, let them talk." His forehead rested against mine, our breaths mingling. "I've spent years making decisions based on what others thought, what tradition demanded, what politics required, but you taught me something. You taught me that the bravest thing you can do is choose compassion over convenience. Choose to see people rather than statistics. Choose to act even when it's terrifying." "What are you saying?" "I'm saying I want you, Vera. Not as my director, though you're brilliant at that. Not as an advisor or a colleague. I want you beside me as my partner, my equal, my mate." The word hung in the air between us, heavy with meaning. Mates in wolf culture weren't just romantic partners. They were bonded for life, joined in ways that went beyond human understanding. "That's impossible," I breathed. "Alpha kings mate with alphas, with women of status and power, not brave women who save dying boys in alleys, not brilliant women who build systems to help those everyone else ignores, not strong women who face down councils full of hostile alphas and convince them to change." He pulled back enough to meet my eyes. "You have more real power than any titled alpha I've ever met, and I've never wanted anyone the way I want you. I should have been sensible, should have listed all the reasons this was a terrible idea, but standing in the garden with lantern light catching in his dark eyes, feeling the warmth of his hand against my skin, all I could think was that I wanted this too. Had wanted it for months, while telling myself it was impossible. "I'm terrified," I admitted. "Me too." He smiled. "But you taught me that being afraid isn't a reason not to try." When he kissed me, it felt like coming home and leaping off a cliff at the same time. His arms wrapped around me, solid and sure, and I let myself melt into the embrace. Let myself be seen and wanted and cherished in ways I'd never imagined possible. We pulled apart eventually, breathless, and he rested his forehead against mine again. "The council is going to lose their minds," I said. "Probably. But several of them already respect you more than they respect half the titled alphas." He grinned. "Besides, I'm the Alpha King. I can mate whoever I want." "Is that a proposal?" "Not yet. I want to court you properly first, show you off. Make sure everyone knows that you chose me as much as I chose you." His expression grew serious. "But yes, Vera. Eventually, if you'll have me, that's exactly what I'm asking." The next months were a whirlwind. Dante courted me openly, scandalizing traditionalists and delighting progressives. We worked together daily on expanding the social programs, our professional partnership deepening the personal one. Owen thrived, eventually taking on more responsibilities and beginning to train others in community outreach. The night Dante officially announced our mating bond, the great hall was packed. Some faces showed disapproval, but more showed acceptance, even joy. The people I'd helped over the past year filled the common areas, celebrating the woman who'd once been invisible becoming their queen. Owen stood beside me as I prepared to walk down the aisle, resplendent in formal attire, no trace left of the dying boy from the alley. "Ready?" he asked. "Terrified," I admitted. "Good, that means it matters." He squeezed my hand. "You saved my life that night, Vera. Let me tell you what I see now. You're about to save a lot more lives. As queen, you'll have even more power to help people, to change things. This is just the beginning." I walked down that aisle with my head high, past servants who'd once been my colleagues, past nobles who'd once looked through me, past the people whose lives had changed because someone finally saw them. Dante waited at the end, his eyes full of love and pride, and when I took his hand, I knew I was exactly where I was meant to be. The ceremony was beautiful. The celebration lasted until dawn. But what I remembered most was later, in the quiet of our chambers, when Dante pulled me close and whispered, "Thank you." For what? For stopping that night, for helping a boy in an alley, for showing me what it means to truly lead. He kissed my forehead, for choosing me, even when it was terrifying. "Always," I promised. "I'll always choose you." And I did. Through the years that followed, through challenges and triumphs, through the continued expansion of programs that transformed how the kingdom treated its most vulnerable, Owen became my right hand, eventually directing programs in the outer territories. The shelters multiplied, the work programs expanded, and slowly invisibility became impossible for those who'd once been overlooked. I wore a crown now, but what I cherished most was knowing that somewhere in the city, a young person in trouble might be seen, might be helped, might be given the second chance that changed everything. Because that night in the alley, when I'd chosen to stop, to see, to act, that choice had changed more than just Owen's life. It had changed mine. It had changed Dante's. It had changed the kingdom. And it all started with one simple truth. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is refuse to look away,